Good morning, everybody. This is Danny Mathematics again. Today, I want to start off with my first example, and once again, I will have many more examples of the same particular concepts. Today, I want to go over solving quadratic functions using the quadratic formula, okay? Solving quadratic functions using the quadratic formula. A quadratic function is just a second degree polynomial where the highest degree is to the second power, okay? Now, before we can even start solving this, well, the first thing I want to let you know is what we're solving is we're trying to find the zeros or the solutions of the quadratic function, meaning that we need to put the function in this form so it can equal to 0. So let's actually do that. Okay, I see I have ax to the second power, which is this, plus bx, which is the minus 2x, but the plus c, which is just the constant or the number, it should be on the left side, but the 48 is on the right side. So what we need to do is we need to utilize the inverse operation and actually move 48 to the left side so the whole function can equal 0, okay? So since I have a positive 48, the inverse of a positive 48 is a negative 48. So I'm gonna subtract 48 on both sides. Okay, and then all I'm doing is just moving it to the left side so the whole function can actually equal 0. So now I have x squared minus 2x minus 48 equal 0. Okay, so now I have it in the form to where I can actually find the solutions, which is just the values of x that would make this particular function equal 0. And since it's to the second power, that means that I can have up to 2 values that we can plug in that will make this whole function equal 0. And we're going to find out those 2 values. So the first thing I want us to do is to label or to identify the coefficients that will represent A, B, and the constant that will represent C. Okay, so what we're going to do is on the side, we're going to create a key. And I think this is the easiest way to do it, to also identify the values before we even get started, okay? So let's look at A. If there is no number in front of x, or x squared rather, then that number is an imaginary 1. So A actually equals 1, okay? Let's go to bx, okay? Bx, the b is the minus 2, or the negative 2 in this case. And once again, if there's a negative sign or a subtraction sign in front of the coefficient, then that is correlated with the coefficient. So it's not positive 2, it's actually a negative 2. Okay, so that's B. So I have A equals positive 1, B equals negative 2. Once we plug into the quadratic formula, you will notice that we not only have a positive B value, we will also have a negative B value. Okay, so if positive B equals negative 2, that means that negative B equals a positive 2. Okay, that is very, very important. And then also the constant, which is C, right? We have a minus 48, which is negative 48, okay? So then that's gonna be C, a negative 48. So we have identified the values of the letters that represent the coefficients and the constants, and we're going to plug in these values into the quadratic function once we get started, okay? Now, the next thing that I want us to do is to actually create the quadratic function. I know this by heart because I've been teaching math for a while, but also, ladies and gentlemen, if you forget the quadratic formula, all you need to do is just go on Google, type in quadratic formula, and the whole formula will appear, okay? So if you ever forget it, just go on Google, type in quadratic formula, and then it will appear, okay? So this is the formula. You have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of positive b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna color code all of my variables that represent the values that I have, because I want us to identify where we're going to plug in these values. So of course we got the negative b and the positive b. I made those be red. We have the a value. I'm going to make that be blue. And then of course we have the c value, right? So all we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we're just going to plug in these values into the formula and then just simplify the formula until we get to our 2 solutions, okay? So the first thing we want to do is just plug in each part. Let's start off with the stuff that's on the outside. I have a negative b. So once again, remember negative b equals a positive 2. So I have a positive 2 in the negative b slot, plus or minus. The reason why there's an addition sign and a subtraction sign stacked on top, that means that at the end of the process, there's going to be one operation where we're going to add and then one operation where we're going to subtract. So we will get to that in a second. Okay, now within the square root sign, of course, we have a b squared, or b to the second power. We can see that b is a negative 2. So I have to have a negative 2 in that slot, okay? Minus 4 times a times c, okay? And also I'm gonna do this each time we plug in a value. We have the a value. The a value is 1. And then we have the c value, which is a negative 48, okay? All over 2 times a, and once again, a is negative 1, okay? So once again, we have everything plugged in. Let me actually make negative 48 just be a little bit bigger so y'all can see. Okay, now we have everything plugged in. So now, ladies and gentlemen, all we're gonna do is just simplify what we have, okay? So once again, everything on the outside of the square root sign stays the same. So I still have a 2 plus or minus. Now I'm inside the square root, okay? Now a negative 2 squared, remember it's not saying negative 2 times 2. A negative 2 squared is saying negative 2 times a negative 2, okay? 2 negatives multiplied together equals a positive. So that turns into a positive 4, okay? Now we have a negative 4 times a positive 1. Let me go ahead and do this for the people that have trouble with negatives and positives, okay? If you do, draw a tic-tac-toe sign, put the positive signs in the diagonal, and then all the other slots are the negative slots, okay? So once again, we already did negative 2 times negative 2, which is a negative times a negative equals a positive, okay? So now we add negative 4 times 1. A negative times a positive equals a negative, so that stays as negative 4, right? And then now we have negative 4 times a negative 48. That's a negative times a negative equals a positive, so let's actually multiply these two values, and we already know that's gonna equal a positive, right? So 4 times 8 is 32, carry the 3. 4 times 4 is 16, plus 3 is 19, right? So now I have 4 plus 192, the square root of 4 plus 192, right? So we're good in that slot. And then now all divided by 2 times 1 is just 2. Okay, so let me just pause right there. That's what you should have. Once again, we just brought down that 2, the plus and minus sign, the operations, the square root. We know that negative 2 squared, which is just negative 2 times negative 2, is a positive 4. And then we did everything else and we got a positive 192 all over 2, okay? So now I'm just gonna move everything over here. I ran out of room. And I'm just gonna rewrite everything right here and then I'm gonna start again. Two, 4, plus 192 all over 2. Okay, so that's what we have so far. So once again, let's keep simplifying. Okay, everything on the outside of the square root sign stays the same. So I still have a 2 plus or minus. Now within the square root, right, we have to add the values that we have, right? 4 plus 192, which actually equals 196. 196. All right, so now we divide by 2. Okay, so now we're almost finished. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually see, does a 196 actually have a square root, an actual value that's a square root of 196? So let's just see, let me just try a couple of values that I believe that might work. let's see if it is 13. If I did 13 times 13, which is this 13 squared, let's see if that works. That's 9, so I know that wouldn't work. So let's try 14. 14 squared, 14 times 14. Let's see if it equals to 196. 4 times 4 is 16, carry the 1. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. I have to stagger over because now I'm in this place value. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 1 is 1. Let's add everything. 6, 9, 1. So the square root of 196 is actually 14 because 14 squared equals 196. Now I have plus or minus. Everything stays the same other than the square root of 196. We know that equals 14. So now I have 2 plus or minus 14 all divided by 2. Now we are back to these two operations. Remember, I told you that we have to do two operations where we're going to actually add 2 plus 14 and divide by 2. And the other operation where we're going to subtract 2 minus 14 divided by 2. So let's actually set up both cases. And this is actually our last step. So plus, minus. And just put everything where they go. 14, 2, 14, 2, 2, 2. Okay? And these are the two values that x can equal to make all of this equal 0. Okay, so let's do the first one. Okay, 2 plus 14 is 16, and 16 divided by 2 is 8. So x can equal 8, okay, to make this whole thing equal 0. Okay, now let's do it over here. 2 minus 14 is a negative 12, and a negative 12 divided by 2 is a negative 6. So these are the two values that x can equal to make this whole thing right here equal 0. So let's just try it out to make sure that that is true. So once again, remember I had an x squared minus 2x minus 48 equal 0, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna plug in one of these values. We're just gonna check one. I'm gonna plug in a positive 8 to see if it's gonna equal 0 if I do, okay? So everywhere that I have an x, that's where I'm gonna plug the positive 8 in. Okay, so x squared, which is 8 squared, minus 2x, which is minus 2 times 8, minus 48, okay? We're gonna see if all of that equals 0. The square root of 8, remember 8, not the square root, the 8 squared, my bad, 8 squared is just 8 times 8. 8 squared is just 8 times 8, which is 64. Okay, a negative 2 times a positive 8 is a negative, and negative 2 times a positive 8 is a negative 16. Okay, and then of course I just bring down the minus 48, right? Equals 0. So now let's do 64 minus 16. Let's just see what we get. Okay, I gotta borrow. Make that be 14. 14 minus 6 is 8. And 5 minus 1 is 4. So this actually becomes 48. And then if I subtract 48 from 48, I will get 0. So if I get 0, that lets me know that 8 is actually one of the solutions that x can be to make this equal 0. Okay, so just make sure that throughout the video that each step that you pause so you can actually follow along, and then also try problems on your own that is very, very similar to this. One thing I always tell my students about math, all the steps will always stay the same. The only thing that will differ is just the values that you put within the formulas. But everything else, all the steps will always stay the same in math. Thank you for this opportunity, and I will give you another example in a few days. Thank you.